guys. Welcome back to One Room Schoolhouse. I'm Dave.
I'm Jonathan.
And we want to hit a few things about World War II because with WallBuilders, we are connected with so many legislators and states across the nation, and we all throughout the year get word from legislators about what the new educational proposals are. And we recently got word about a state that has said, well, we're going to stop teaching the American Revolution and the Civil War and World War I and World War II and the Holocaust. The official state standards are dropping all of that out. And of interest is World War II and the Holocaust. At least that's what we're going to talk about for a little bit. When World War II started, we weren't ready for it. We were trying to stay out of the war. And it really took us 2 to 3 years to get really geared up. So even though we get in the war in 1941, the latter part of that year, it's really not until we get into about June of 44 when we do the D-Day invasion. We now have built up enough forces to be able to go repel the Germans and push them back into Germany, get them out of Europe.
Yeah, and D-Day is when the Allies, with the Americans, the British, we land in Nazi-occupied France, right? And then we start moving inland from that big landing. It's what, the largest amphibious landing in history.
About 6,200 boats involved. There were hundreds of planes. It was massive.
Yeah, and so this finally breaks into Hitler's Europe and starts pushing the German forces back to the Rhine, back to actual Germany. And as we start capturing this land, as we start liberating thousands of people, our soldiers start discovering things that are absolutely horrific.
The plan was for the Allied forces led by Americans to come in from the west side and push to the east, and the Russians are going to be east side pushing to the west, and we'll get Germany back into Germany, get them corralled there. And so as we start getting into Germany, we get into Poland, Czechoslovakia, our soldiers, they start liberating concentration camps and death camps. And as they get there and find out what's been going on, because they're familiar with prisoner of war camps, but when they get into these death camps and concentration camps, they're finding stuff that just is beyond imagination, so barbaric and inhumane. And so as Eisenhower, who's commander-in-chief over all the Allied forces in Europe, as he gets word and as he's told of what's happening, as he starts to see some pictures, he says, okay, everybody stop right now. Don't do anything else with these concentration death camps until we first get photographers in there to photograph this, because no one's going to believe what we're seeing. It's so inhumane and so barbaric. And so while the war was still going on, they started producing different versions of photographic magazines. I'm not going to open them up. You can look online. These are all from different concentration camps. As they went in, they would photograph them. And it is really barbaric. And this is what we call the Holocaust. And so the Holocaust involves really between 6 and 7 million Jews being slaughtered by the Germans, not in war, but in just murder, and another 6 million Gentiles being slaughtered, about 13 million total being just absolutely murdered in the most barbaric, inhumane ways, medical experiments. I mean, it was just atrocious. And so that's what was documented with this. And they put this out there so that people in the future, like our generation now, would actually know that this kind of inhumanity actually occurred.
And what's wild is, despite having such irrefutable evidence, an unbelievable people inexcusable when you think about the amount of significance. I mean, just the importance of it. And actually one of the mottos afterwards was "never again," right? And in fact, here's another one of the
book
artifacts.
Right here. This is the end of World War II. It's called "Never Again." It has a little survey of so many of the photographs that they had in the other books. And it was, we're going to study the Holocaust so that this never again happens. We're going to make sure it never does. And as you pointed out, with the younger generation, the most notorious death camp is probably known as Auschwitz. And Auschwitz, today, 68% of millennials have never heard of Auschwitz, and 22% have never heard of the Holocaust. It is so bad that a year ago, the federal Congress passed and President Trump signed the Never Again Education Act, requiring every school to teach about the Holocaust. Because if you don't teach about it, we have Holocaust deniers say, oh no, that never happened.
Yeah.
No, we've got all the evidence. It did happen. And now we've got a state saying, hey, we're not going to teach about any of the wars or the Holocaust. We're just going to do 1619. 1619, we'll teach that and teach everything else from that perspective, not the Holocaust. But we do know that it actually happened. There's no question that it actually happened.
We actually have this artifact right here, which further attests to the fact that the Holocaust happened and really speaks to the atrocities of it from an eyewitness perspective. So this is a primary source, and it's written April 19th, 1945, by somebody in Germany. And actually, this was done by a military police officer.
This is a World War II military police officer's badge. This is after we've liberated an area and liberated one of these concentration camps that he writes this letter.
Yeah, and it's actually before the final war in Europe actually ends. And he's a part of this force, and he goes, and I want to read you a portion of it just so that you can hear from somebody who was actually there just some of the terrible, evil, wicked things that were going on. And so I'll pick it up here. It says, I wrote you about the slave labor camp and said I didn't care to see anything like that again, but I heard yesterday morning that I missed a part of it. So I went back yesterday afternoon and got my belly full. Went through what they called a laboratory, which was one of the worst things you could think of. They had a cross-section of a man's head in a jar, and a head that had been shrunk to the size of my fist. First they boiled it in boiling water and then filled it with hot sand. The hair is still there and it's perfect. Then they have every part of a human body in glass jars. They would get slaves in with tattoos on their bodies and peel the skin from them and make lampshades from it. The pile of bodies had grown during the night. In one place they had a large trailer stacked full, and down by the hospital, or what they called the hospital, was a room stacked full. And he keeps on going, describing the terrible conditions, the terrible atrocities that the Jews of Europe had to suffer through underneath this totalitarian Nazi regime. And I mean, it's just, obviously we need to learn about this so that we can continue on in the cause after the Second World War of never again, right? We can never allow these ideas to take root.
And when word of this got out from guys who actually saw it, that's where they had General Eisenhower come in. He toured these areas and saw it and said, this is unbelievable. He then made the soldiers bring in the nearby Germans who had been around the concentration camp and come look at it, because they were kind of turning their back, turning their head, and of course they didn't have control over Hitler and they didn't want to say anything. But we have photographs in these books of the neighbors, if you will, coming in and seeing it and just crying and bawling over how bad it is. Here are some pictures of American officers going through and looking. This lamp right here, that's human skin. That lampshade is made out of human skin. And you see here on the table in front all the things they were talking about, the shrunken head and the head that's been dissected and all the different parts of the body. These are the things where they bring the community in and have the community see it as well. So these are things that are real. And again, this goes back to the never again. If you don't know what happened, if you don't know how bad humanity can be to others, if you don't know that there is evil in the world, you just assume everything's going to be fine and we just assume the best of people. We know that's not true. And that's why we want good government, we want good leadership, we want good history so that we can know our history and not repeat it. And that's why it's important that even as the 1619 Project kind of sweeps America, we can't stop teaching what actually happened in things like the Holocaust, because if we do, we're much more likely to repeat it, and we don't want that to happen ever again.